Faith, in many instances, has been the fuel that has fed the passionate flame in the fight for our freedom. Our American history is filled with examples of people of faith who have, in a defiant manner, broken the vessels of tradition and sacred values in order to serve up revolutionary social change. It's quite likely that in the background, if not the forefront of every effort in the quest for justice, there have been people of faith providing support and leadership. The church was not only the meeting place for the movement in the South, it was also the center of the movement, in that it served as a symbol of the movement itself. It was a place where people could express themselves without reprisal. It was a place where people could speak the truth, where they could sing, cry, and even shout. As we celebrate this Black History moment, it's important to highlight that it's important to highlight why the Black church has been the fundamental key throughout our Black history.
Born into slavery in 1760, I became a Methodist preacher, an outspoken advocate of racial equality, and a founder of the first African Methodist Church. It was one of the largest independent African American denominations in the country. I was not only a minister and a bishop, but I was also an educator, a writer, and one of America's most active, influential Black leaders. I focused on things like organizing a denomination in which free Black people could worship without racial oppression and enslaved people could find a measure of dignity. I played a huge part in why you could worship freely today without any barriers. I am Richard Allen.
The daughter of former slaves, I became one of the most important Black educators, civil and women's rights, and governmental officials of the 20th century. The college I founded set the educational standards for today's Black colleges, and my role as an advisor to President FDR gave African Americans an advocate in government. Graduating in 1894 from the Scotia Seminary, a boarding school in North Carolina, I next attended Dwight Moody's Institute for Home and Foreign Missions in Chicago, Illinois. But with no church willing to sponsor me as a missionary, I became an educator. A champion for racial and gender equality, I founded many organizations and led voter registration drives in 1924 and was elected president of the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs in 1935. I became the founding president of the National Council of Negro Women. A friend of Eleanor Roosevelt, I became the highest ranking African American woman in government when President FDR named me the Negro Affairs of National Administration. I was a leader of FDR's unofficial Black cabinet. And on July 13th, 2022, I became the first African American represented with a statue in the U.S. Capitol. I am Mary McLeod Bethune.
I am known as the 20th century recording artist Mahalia Jackson, known as the Queen of Gospel, and has been revered as one of the greatest musical figures in U.S. history. Born on October 26, 1911, in New Orleans, Louisiana, to Charity Clark and Johnny Jackson, I became one of gospel's music all-time greats, known for my rich, powerful voice that cultivated a global following. I started singing as a child at Mount Mary Baptist Church and went on to become one of the most reverend gospel figures in the United States. I became member of the Johnson Gospel Singers. Then I started working with Thomas A. Dorsey, a gospel composer. We performed around the U.S., further cultivating an audience for myself. An active supporter of the civil rights movement, I took on a number of roles, working as a laundress, beautician, and flower shop owner. My record, Move On Up, a little higher, in 1947, which sold millions of copies and became the highest selling gospel single in history. I am Mahalia Jackson.
My name is Phyllis Wheatley. I was born in Africa about 1753 and sold as a slave in Boston in 1761. I was a small, sick child who caught the attention of John and Susanna Wheatley. I was purchased as a domestic servant by the Wheatleys and was named after the ship that brought me to Boston, the Phyllis, and my master, the Wheatleys. Susanna soon discovered that I had an extraordinary capacity to learn. She relieved me of most of my domestic duties and educated me with assistance from her daughter in reading, writing, religion, language, literature, and history. I began publishing my poems around the age of 12, and soon afterward, my fame spread across the Atlantic. With Susanna's support, I began posting advertisements for subscribers for my first book of poems. However, when the colonists were apparently unwilling to support literature by an African, the Wheatleys and I turned to frustration and headed to London for publishing. Selena Hastings, the Countess of Huntingdon, a friend of Susanna Wheatley, eventually funded the publication of my book. In 1773, I accomplished something that no other woman of my status had done. When my book of poetry, poems of various subjects, religions, and morals appeared, I became the first American slave, the first person of African descent, and the only third colonial American woman to have her work published. I married a free black man in 1778. We had children, but they never survived infancy due to being in severe poverty. I accepted a job as a maid in a local boarding house, but I later died December 5th, 1984, along with my infant. My husband was later jailed for debt. I am Phyllis Wheatley.
I was birthed in 1899. I am a bashful man, and I didn't lead any marches or give any dramatic speeches. What I did do is transform the history by being willing to allow God to use me. I am a pastor, a professor, and my groundbreaking book, Jesus and the Disinherited, is the condemnation of a specific type of Christianity. Listen carefully. This kind is on the side of the strong and the powerful against the weak and the oppressed. My book revolutionized the traditional portrait of Jesus and had a profound influence on Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.'s faith and activism. I was born in Florida during the post-Civil War era, and I graduated from Morehouse College in Atlanta, where I was a classmate of Daddy King, the father of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. My impact on the younger King was profound. I am the first African American pastor to travel to India and meet Mohandas Gandhi, and I also am one of the first pastors to inspire Reverend Martin Luther King to merge Gandhi's philosophy of nonviolent resistance with the civil rights movement. My concept about nonviolence and Jesus are peppered throughout Reverend King's writings. My life is proof that all sorts of people could become influential leaders in the civil rights movement. I am Howard Thurman.
My name is William Joseph Seymour. I was born in Centerville, Louisiana on March 2nd, 1870, to former slaves Simon and Phyllis Seymour. Raised as a Baptist, I was given dreams and visions as a youth. At age 25, I moved to Indianapolis, where I worked as a railroad porter and waited tables in a fashionable restaurant. And around this time, I contracted smallpox and went blind in my left eye. In 1900, I relocated to Cincinnati. I was then invited to stay in the home of Richard Asbury at 214 Bunny Bray Street, where on April 9th, after a month of intense prayer and fasting, me and several others spoke in tongues. Word spread so quickly I was forced to speak on the porch. What happened at Azusa Street during the next 3 years was to change the course of church history. After the glory years in 1906 to 1909, the Azusa Street Mission became a small black church pastored by me until my death on September 28, 1922, and then by my wife, Jenny, until her death in 1936. So it was later sold for unpaid taxes and then demolished. I am William J. Seymour.
The greatness of our lives is not in what we leave behind, but in what we send forward. Will you take it from here and finish the race?